Can easier gears help you to ride faster for less effort?
And is spin to win an actual thing?
And is this whacking big 36 tooth cassette better than a 28 tooth cassette, which was considered a big boy some 10 years ago?
We think that most riders could benefit by having bigger gears on their cassette. And to explain why and demonstrate potentially how, we're going to do a test where we ride up a climb at a set power output to see how that impacts your heart rate, your perceived exertion, and potentially speed. It's an interesting concept to think that simply by fitting easier gears and being able to spin your legs faster, you can effectively put less strain on your leg muscles and save your legs a bit and be more efficient, which if you were doing an epic ride or a Sportive or a Gran Fondo, that could make a huge difference when you come towards the back end of something like that. But not only that, you know, if you come to ride your bike in an amazing location for a week like we're in Mallorca, you're incurring a lot of fatigue day to day. And so by spinning more, that could also be a big benefit.
Which is a good thing. So to put this to the test, I am going to ride up this epic climb over my shoulder here and do a 3-kilometer section. It's colder for Menu. I'm going to ride at a set power of around the 200 watt marker, which equates to 2.6 watts per kilo. This is an effort which I feel is reasonable and repeatable, and it's also going to not put additional strain and stress on my body that the fatigue affects my heart rate when I repeat the test for the second time round. It's also a power which we feel is really relatable to lots of different people. I'm going to do test number 1 with an easiest gear ratio of a 36 tooth chainring at the front and at most a 28 tooth cassette at the back. This is going to give me a gear ratio of 1 to 1.29. That means for every 1 revolution of the crank, the rear wheel is going to rotate 1.29 times. And then I'm going to go back and repeat the test, but this time I'm going to use a 36 tooth chainring at the front again, but I'm going to allow myself to use this great big 36 tooth sprocket at the back. This is going to give me a gear ratio of 1 to 1. That means for every 1 revolution of the crank, the wheel is also going to rotate 1 complete revolution. And I'm going to ride at the same power, but by using this gear ratio, it's going to allow my cadence to be higher. And then because the power that you ride at in watts is simply a calculation of force multiplied by cadence, if I increase the cadence, it's going to allow the force to be slightly lower, which in theory is going to shift the fatigue away from my legs and to my cardiovascular system, in theory.
With Alex gone, cast your minds back to the dawn of professional cycling when riders would churn up mountains with horrifically slow cadences because they only had 1 gear on the back. As technology advanced, riders got more gears on the back and the derailleur was invented. But even in the sort of Merckx era, riders were still churning away at cadences around 50 RPM or below because they didn't have those easier gears. But what we've seen is a progression throughout pro cycling over the years where gears have got increasingly larger at the back and increasingly easier, to the point where we're at now, where you look at the recent Vuelta a España and a lot of the pro riders were routinely using 1134 cassettes in the mountains day in, day out. And speaking from personal experience, that's a cassette that I use. I have an 1134 cassette on my bike all the time, and I find it really useful, not just on super steep gradients, but also on climbs where the gradients barely go above double digits, just because I'm still able to spin and stay seated even when I'm doing hard efforts.
Okay, underway on test number 1. We're at halfway up the climb now, and it's pretty easy going actually. Sitting here away, plodding along in a fairly big gear. I can't say I'm noticing it other than the times when the road really kicks up a bit. And then I certainly do feel like I'm having that feeling of grinding a little bit. But it's interesting. I'm not particularly out of breath having to do it. And it kind of feels as though it is my actual legs doing all the hard work. is kind of bizarre is to think that even though I'm saying I'm using what would be a standard or slightly tougher gear to use, it's still quite a lot easier than the gear ratios that I used to use when I started out racing. Back then, a 39 tooth chainring and a 25 tooth or a 28 tooth sprocket on the cassette was pretty much the norm. Compared to now, it'd almost be unheard of for a modern bike to be supplied with gear ratios like that. Okay, I'm about to start test 2, which means I'm going to utilise this big 36 tooth cassette to get my cadence to be much higher. Then we're going to see what the result is. Now, you might have noticed I actually rode up the last time with the 36 tooth cassette on, but trust me, I only used up to a maximum of the 28 tooth sprocket. You're going to need to believe me on that because we don't have a GCN Mallorca Mega Bass to switch the cassettes over. Anyway, right, let's get to it. Off we go. 3, 2, 1, boom.
The astonishing speeds that pros can climb has increased, and they're also pedalling at faster cadences than ever before and going up steeper climbs. And while there are many reasons for this, we think that a big one is gearing. It's not quite as simple as just looking at one gear ratio versus another. There are other factors to consider, such as the weight of the system and also other gear ratios available within a specific cassette. So by adding a larger cassette, you're adding a little bit of weight. You're also going to have to run a longer chain and a longer derailleur cage, which adds additional weight too, meaning that the total system weight could be around 100 or 200 grams more. This isn't a weight that's easy to notice for anyone when they're riding, and it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Plus, as we already mentioned, the pros are running 1134 cassettes on climbs like the Angleroo, which are among the steepest in pro cycling. It kind of tells you everything you need to know.
Something which is noticeable and definitely worth considering though are the gaps between gears. This is something which is much more noticeable on a wide ratio cassette. On a small ratio cassette, something like an 1125, you have much smaller gaps, and time trialists have historically loved these cassettes because they allow you to sort of refine tune your cadence. And what can happen if you're using a wider ratio cassette is you can sometimes feel that you're between gears where you can't get the cadence and the gear you want. You go down a gear, it's too hard, and then you go up a gear and it feels too easy. The advent of 12-speed group sets has alleviated this, so much so that it's not really that much of an issue if you run an 1134 cassette. But if you're running an older group set, definitely bear it in mind, 7-speed, or, even with 9, 10, 11 speed, something to think about.
Riding at a high cadence like this certainly does take a little bit more concentration, and when you try to ride out the saddle, it does feel particularly unnatural. But I'm interested to see how it's going to affect my overall time and speed here. Okay, so initial thoughts on using these easier gears. I'm loving it, I like it. It's really clear already that it does feel as if it's shifted the workload and work rate of my body away from my legs and up to my lungs and my heart, my cardiovascular system, which is kind of the theory behind it. So I'm glad to hear that the theory feels like it's coming into practice. Average cadence is easily 20 to 30 RPM higher than run number 1. So it should be a good little back-to-back run. What's crazy is to think that so many people could potentially benefit from this. Okay, into the final little bit now of this test. Pretty much there. I'm excited to go through the results with Ollie, see if we're right or wrong.
You all right, mate?
All right.
How was that?
Actually really interesting. Okay, so the 3 kilometre climb with the 36/28 took me 15 minutes and 55 seconds. 200 watts, 100 beats a minute, average cadence of 64 RPM. And I'm gonna say, in terms of we were discussing rate of perceived exertion, it feels relatively low. There was a bit of strain on my legs, but overall my body felt like it was just ticking along, cruising.
Yeah.
Second run, we've got exactly the same average power. I used the 36-36, which gave me that 1-to-1 ratio, which meant I have a time of 15 minutes, 56 seconds, technically 1 second slower, but I think we can count that within the margin of error. Heart rate, average, 108 beats a minute, so that's 8 beats higher, and the average cadence was 87. So that is what, 23 RPM faster using that gear range. But I'm gonna throw it out there that my rate of perceived exertion felt slightly higher by using that easier gear and pedaling faster, which might sound counterintuitive. It's taking the force and stress away from my legs, but because it's made my heart rate and breathing a little bit elevated, it's giving me that feeling that I'm working harder.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, Ollie, easier gears, good thing or a bad thing?
100% good thing. They're not going to transform you into a pro and unlock some hidden talent that you had hiding within, unfortunately, but they can make super steep climbs significantly easier, and they can take strain, even on gentle climbs like this, they can take significant strain off your legs and transfer that onto your cardiovascular system. And one of the things that people often do who struggle on climbs and want to make cycling up steep climbs difficult is they immediately think lighter bike. But we would argue that the easier gears is a much better route to go down and will make much bigger difference to your ability to ride up steep climbs than spending loads saving on a lighter bike.
Even if it feels like slightly odd to add additional weight onto your bike to get those easy gears, that's by far going to make the biggest difference. And I think the big takeaway thing for me is that whilst shifting the fatigue away from your legs is elevating your heart rate, that system is far more efficient. It's got way more like endurance capabilities, whereas your muscles are literally going to get tired quite quickly.
Yeah, and then from day to day as well.
It's something that I think it's important for people to transfer across rather than just sticking to the gearing that they have on their bikes they cycle with at home. If you travel to a hilly destination, it's something that I think is really important to consider taking into account.
Yeah, and there's some other considerations as well, such as if you fit a larger cassette to your bike, then you get easier gears not just at the top end, but say 3 in from the easiest gear. And that might allow you to stay in the big ring for longer, which in a race situation is something that racers often want to be able to do, because they don't want to have to do that front chainring shift at a key moment. Say if they're just cresting a short little hill, they want to stay in that big ring.
So overall, you think easy gears are a good thing. I think easy gears are a good thing. And it's not drastically going to change the actual speed that you ride at.
No. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments, and if you're interested in easier gears. If you've got any questions, fire them below. And, well, hope you found this useful. Give it a thumbs up if you have. We'll see you in the next one. Should we go get some cake?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ciao.